We've invited Disability Rights of California to join us to give a presentation on early start. And Emily is waving, so I'm not sure if she needed something. So my name is Sonia Valenzuela, and I am the Family Resource Center manager, as well as the Help Me Grow manager. I just wanted to ask everyone to please sign in using the chat, put your first and last name, and indicate if you are a parent or a provider. I just want to let you know that we're recording this session and all questions will be at the end. So let the presenters give their presentation, and at the very end, we'll save time for the Q&A, for the questions and answers, and we'll stop recording at that time, just in case anything that's confidential comes up. We want to protect you and your children's confidentiality. So we want to make sure that we do that. We will have a survey monkey at the end, so please fill that out. It's really important to the FRC that we receive your filled out survey. We're a nonprofit, and it's the way we continue to get funding. And then tomorrow we'll make sure with Patty and I to send out the DRCA, the Disability Rights California survey, as well as their PowerPoint. All right, and I'm going to pass it over to Patty. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a very special day for us. We have our Disability Rights of California staff and lawyer coming and give us this presentation that is going to be very helpful, hopefully for you all, for parents and providers. This training is an opportunity for parents and guardians of children from birth to age 3 to get information they need to navigate the early start system. So we're very honored and thank you all for being with us. We have a simultaneous translation at this moment, so please be sure that you select the Spanish version if that's what you want to hear the presentation in. And then I want to just very quickly, briefly say something about the Family Resource Center. We are in San Mateo County. We serve the San Mateo County area, and then we are here to support you in any questions that you might have about resources, how to navigate systems like Golden Gate Regional Center, Social Security, school districts, and others. We connect sometimes, we try to connect families with the resources so they can, access services for their children, especially when they're at the early beginning of understanding what the process of special education is and special needs for children. I'm gonna pass now the presentation to Disability Rights of California. And yes, thank you, please. Lonnie,
let's hold on for just a second. We wanna make sure that the Spanish speaking attendees know how to access the interpretation. We have one question from someone asking, how do they get to the Spanish piece?
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't see the chat. Go ahead.
So yes, that's okay. So if you can say that in Spanish, how they can do that, that'd be great.
Por favor, si pueden acceder al menú donde dice interpretación, debe aparecer en el lado de abajo de su menú de Zoom. Seleccione de English a Spanish y podrán escuchar la traducción simultáneamente en otro canal.
Sí, por favor, indican si lo pueden hacer. Gracias.
Si me avisan si no pueden o tienen. Ok, perfecto. Ok, ¿alguien más que necesita soporte o? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Sonia. Lonnie, I'm sorry, you can go ahead and
okay, thank you so much, and welcome everyone, and good evening. Thank you for having us today and being here to hear our presenter for this evening, Emily Ukuta, who will share a little information about herself. But on behalf of Raymond Kwong and myself, for those who don't know about Disability Rights California, we'd like to share a little bit about our agency, and then I'll turn it over to Emily. So Disability Rights California is formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We are a nonprofit legal organization that provides legal services for people with disability. We have offices in Sacramento, Los Angeles, Bay Area, San Diego, and our smaller offices are in Fresno, Modesto, and Ontario. We work on issues such as special education, regional center services, public benefit, housing, mental health services, employment discrimination, and so forth. We received 2 funding from 2 state contracts, the Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy and California Office of Patient Rights. We also received 9 federal protection and advocacy program funding and the state bar. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily. Thank you so much again.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Ikuta. I am a staff attorney at Disability Rights California. So just to give you a little bit more detail about myself, I am an attorney that specifically works at DRC's Legal Advocacy Unit. That is actually separate from the Office of Clients' Rights, or OCRA, but nonetheless, a lot of my work overlaps in that I provide advocacy and support service, advocacy, legal representation, and support services for clients or people applying for services from the regional centers. And I'm not restricted by location. So I have helped clients with regional centers in Northern California, Southern California, whichever regional center that they're localized in of the 21 regional centers I can help. So like Lalani said, we've provided a wide range of advocacy services, from attending an IPP meeting to representing at hearing to even just providing information or drafting complaints. It is a broad type and range that we are willing to do free of charge, depending on our capacity. So that's just a breakdown of myself, that my work is largely focused on access to regional center services for clients who have developmental and intellectual disabilities. So now that I've gone through that boring background, let's get into the early start process. So just a heads up, if I'm going to go through this presentation, going into the basics of early start, and if we could reserve questions toward the end of the presentation, that way it just limits disruption, and very likely the question you have, I will address as I go along in this presentation. So thank you all for being patient, and I will move on. So before I go into just like the details and about early intervention, I want to go over just broadly how it came to be, just to give you some context so you get a better understanding of why this program was created and what it's for. So the legislation that created the early intervention program was actually in federal law. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, I put it on there on the slide, IDEA, and that required each of the states to provide these services for families who had children, very young children, infants and toddlers under the age of 3. California's version of this is called the Early Start Program. So California's Early Start Program is just its version of the Early Intervention Program. I just want to bring that up in case there's like some confusion of like early intervention, early start. Is there a difference? Not really. It's just Early Start is just the name of California's early intervention. Just want to let you know, I realized the picture on the English slide is actually covering up one of the words. It actually says Early Start Program is California's early intervention program. So my apologies. I have to move that picture so it's not covering up the slide words. So that is just a breakdown of how the early intervention, and by extension, the state's Early Start Program came to be. So what's the purpose of this program? Why is it important? What can it do? Well, the Early Start Intervention Program, as well as California's Early Start Program, the whole purpose is to provide services for infants and toddlers, as well as their families who are younger than 3 years old, and to help improve development during the first years of life. So it's really meant to address the need, if there is a need with infants and toddlers below the age of 3 who are exhibiting developmental delays and who would greatly benefit from these services. And there's with a big emphasis on timeliness, being able to address these delays at the in the early years of life, since they are a critical development period, ages 0 to 3 for infants and toddlers. And so that's just sort of the breakdown of what the purpose is and what the specific and what the type of people and individuals that it's meant to help. Now, one thing I want to address is that there's an overlap of which agency is actually responsible for implementing this early start program in California. So it's actually administered by the Department of Developmental Services. I just refer to DDS for short, as well as the Department of Education, CDE. So just to give you an idea of just a broad idea of these agencies, DDS, that's the agency that actually helps to provide funding and monitors the regional centers. So DDS is regional centers, Department of Education are school districts. DDS is in fact, however, the lead agency for the Early Start program. So it is the one ultimately responsible for administering and coordinating early intervention services, as well as overseeing the delivery of services through the regional centers. So it's actually the regional center that is the point of entry into early intervention, but it is supposed to be a cooperation with both the department, with both DDS and the school districts actually working together on this. But it is through your regional center that you make that that you are applying for early start services. Oh, and heads up, I do put down the relevant laws and codes at the bottom of the slides, just so you actually, number one, knowing where I'm pulling my information from, but also if you yourself want to cite to these laws when the need arises. So early start eligibility requirements. I mentioned before that that applicants for early start are eligible if they are exhibiting delays in developmental delays. So just to go into a little bit more specificity about that, for a child or an infant under the age of 3, they must meet at least one of the following criteria. They have a developmental delay, there is some established risk conditions, and there's a high risk of having a developmental disability. I'll go into more in the following slides of what that actually means when they to meet one of these criteria. So a developmental delay is a delay in at least one of the following 5 areas, and I put it down on the slide: cognitive development, communication development, physical or motor development, and that includes vision and hearing, social and emotional development, and adaptive development. That last one being more adjusting and being able to work well in the community or socialize. There is and finally, and just sort of like, okay, so what does it mean to have a delay in these areas? How much of a delay are we talking about for your child to be eligible for early start? Well, it's based on, is there a significant difference between the expected level of development for the child's age and the child's current level of functioning? So exactly what is expected of a child your age, whether they're an infant or just below 3, what's expected of that level of development in these 5 areas, and what is in fact their current level of development. The bigger the difference between what is expected and what you're actually and what is actually being exhibited, the more likely that child is going to be eligible for early start services, because they are showing that developmental delay. Another one is established risk conditions. So this is where they look into, okay, what was the situation where the where a child or toddler being diagnosed with a condition with a high probability of leading to a developmental delay. So just to give an example of where there's a diagnosis that is very likely going to result in a developmental delay that needs to be addressed. For example, I put down Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. So if there is an official diagnosis of these conditions like this, it's very likely that there are going to be the risk of developmental delay where early start really should be, where early start is really necessary. And just a note, I believe it with low incidence disabilities, those are disabilities where there's a possibility where there's eligibility for early start, but it's, and that would be hearing, vision, severe orthopedic impairments, or a combination of these conditions. High risk of having a developmental disability, just continuing on that point. So there's a high risk of another factor is the high risk of your child having a developmental disability due to a combination of these other factors. Diagnosed by a medical professional, other things like there was a premature birth, or very low birth weight, seizures, exposure to some drug or substance while in utero, some accident or illness affecting development. This is actually just a list of possible factors that indicate that there is a high risk of developmental disability, and that this person would and that for that reason, they should be getting early start services. And again, I put down the relevant code if you want to look up the underlying law. All right, so now that I've broke down about what early start is and how it works, just to the eligibility criteria, then okay, what's the next step? How do I actually get into this program? What do I do? So there is a process for referral for early start or early intervention services. Recommendations for early start, as in like, look, we have an infant or toddler that is exhibiting developmental delays. I want to let the regional center know you should assess this person to see if he or she is eligible for early start. So who can do that? It can be the parents. It can be doctors, it can be service providers. It's actually a very broad list of people who can make that referral to the regional center. So the referral to the regional center or school district, if the school district is the one picking up that role, it can be done orally, like as in like, calling up or asking them. It can be done also in writing. Ideally, we strongly recommend in writing. It's always good to have a written record, just showing when you made that request, what you were, and why you made that request. And also that referral, once made, within 2 working days after the identification of an infant or toddler. The referral is within 2 working days after identification of the infant and toddler in need of early intervention services. And also just noting, because sometimes we've seen circumstances where parents, who have reached out to regional centers, where like they're just expressing concern about their child's development. Is that enough to initiate a referral? So the referral triggers the evaluation process, even if so I just want to note that if you, the parent, express concern about your child's delay, that can be enough to trigger, that should be enough to trigger the evaluation process for early start. So sometimes regional centers, they'll put their own opinions and be like, well, we don't actually suspect this child of having a developmental disability. And therefore, we doubt if this infant or toddler is actually eligible for early start. Doesn't matter. If you, the child, have expressed that concern and make a request for evaluation for early start, then the regional center has to act on it. So I just want to really emphasize that point, that you, the parent, you can push for that evaluation for early start, even if the regional center puts up resistance to that. So how is eligibility for early intervention services determined? Regional centers and school districts, they're the ones responsible for ensuring that there is a proper application for the evaluation for early start. So this assessment, these evaluations, when they're doing it to determine, okay, is this child or infant, are they eligible for early start? They evaluate levels of functioning in the areas of, and this is going to sound familiar, cognitive development, physical and motor development, communication development, social or emotional development, and adaptive development. Also of note, these assessments should be done, or actually they must be done in, if possible, a natural environment. So that's going to be like the home, the most comfortable setting for the child, usually their parents' house. That being said, that has been complicated with the whole pandemic for the past 2 years. And there actually have been some directives from DDS emphasizing that if necessary, that these early start processes can be done remotely. And there have even been changes recognizing possibility of having a child in early start, even if they haven't been able to do the full early start evaluation process, just to make sure that people are getting the services they need, given that in-person evaluations have been complicated by the whole COVID-19 health crisis. Also, just a heads up, if I'm talking too fast and not giving enough time to the interpreter, please let me know. I want to make sure that I don't get ahead of myself. Okay, so moving on, how will eligibility for early intervention services be determined? So once a referral is made, whether by the parent, a doctor, the service provider, once that whoever it is that sends the referral, the regional center must conduct the assessment. They have to hold a meeting to determine eligibility, and they have to develop an individualized family service plan, IFSP for short. And that must be done within 45 days of the date they receive that referral request. So once they get that referral, they've got 45 days to do all of this, including the assessment and the IFSP if the child is found eligible for early start services. So which agency is responsible? This is just a question that I want to address in case it is of concern for anyone. Which agency is responsible for ensuring that early intervention services are provided? Remember in the last slide where I said there is coordination and overlap with the Department of Education and those school districts, and also DDS and the regional centers? Well, despite that, DDS, the one who is managing the regional centers, they are the lead agency. So it is the regional center that is responsible for providing or the purchasing appropriate services, at least those that are beyond the responsibilities of school districts. That being said, I want to emphasize this. The regional centers are described as the payers of last resort. And this is something that comes up for those both an early start, but also those who have applied and start receiving services as a client of the regional center. But that generic resource, I'm going to go into more detail later in this presentation. The regional center is ultimately, but that being said, nonetheless, the regional center is ultimately responsible for providing and or funding services for children under age 3 who may be eligible for services from both the regional center and the school district in this area of early start. Okay, so in the last couple slides, I mentioned IFSP. So let's get ahead. Let's say that you've gone through the whole referral, the assessment, and your child under age 3 is actually found eligible for early start. So what happens then? Well, a big important component of that is the IFSP, which I will go into detail in the following slides. So the IFSP is a service plan. It is developed once eligibility for early start is determined. And think of this plan as a contract for your child, between the child, and by extension, parents, and the regional center. This IFSP is a roadmap of the services that the child is to get funded by the regional center. It identifies the services appropriate to meet their needs. It includes goals, objectives, and a list of what those services are that the family, including you, the parent, has agreed to with the regional center. We usually refer to that as the IFSP team. So that's like the team of everyone involved in this process, including the parents, service providers, the regional center, possibly the school district if they're involved, if they play a role. That is the IFSP team. So this, well, I guess I just answered it in the last slide. IFSP team, parents, other family members, if you request it. IFSP team can even include advocates and of course, the service coordinator from the regional center, any professionals that were involved in the evaluation or assessment. So you can request that the person who actually did the assessment, the evaluation for early start, be at that IFSP meeting and be part of that team. And also the service providers, the ones who are actually giving the services for the early intervention services for your child. I just want to click a quick note because this kind of ties back to the whole how COVID-19 has impacted these in-person IFSP meetings. So if a person, but also just in general, if a person who is part of the IFSP team is unable to attend a meeting or some other arrangement in person, then with everyone's approval, they can still participate, like having a telephone conference call, having a representative go to the meeting on their behalf, or releasing or giving up or providing records to help that IFSP process. So, that includes popping in a Zoom meeting like I am right now. So I just want to make that, so the IFSP process does allow for that flexibility if it means making sure everyone is part of that meeting, assuming the team agrees. Okay, so sorry about that. Going back to could you go back to the IFSP process? The IFSP, it must include the following: what your child's present levels of functioning and need, relevant family information and background info, the major results or outcomes expected to be achieved for your child and family. So like the expected level, or what level that we're aiming towards. The specific early intervention services that your child is going to receive, when, where, how much, and how often they receive the services. So there should be a breakdown of like how many hours of these services, what days, for how long, who will pay for the services. It should be the regional center, but that should be noted in the IFSP. The name of the service coordinator, as well as transition planning, because this, as implied in the previous slides, this applies to these services apply to children up until age 3. Once you hit age 3, there is going to be a transition process out of early start. So there should already be discussion. There already should be mention of that in the IFSP plan. Okay, and how is the IFSP developed and how often it is reviewed? How often is it reviewed? So a multidisciplinary team, and this is pretty much the IFSP team, develops the IFSP from the assessments and evaluations made of your child. And the IFSP has to identify what the unique needs are, what your child's unique needs and how those needs are to be met. The IFSP also identifies the services appropriate to meet such needs. The IFSP is evaluated at least once a year, so it has to be an annual thing. In addition, a review of the plan is provided to the family every 6 months or more often if needed, or if you, the parents, request a review. So there's like a 6-month review, and there's also an IFSP evaluation once a year. But if you, the family, request a review of the plan, then the regional center has to, the IFSP team has to respect that and provide that and follow up with a meeting to discuss that review. So just to continue on IFSP development, IFSP meetings, they must be held at places or at times convenient for the family. So if the location and time of most comfort to the family, with their preference, that's going to determine when and where that meeting is going to be held. The lead agency, likely it's going to be the regional center, but possibly school district, they must obtain parental consent. So of course, you, the parents, they're the ones that the regional center has to make sure that you give approval for this whole process. The parent's informed written consent is then required to implement the IFSP. So this is after there's been discussion and agreement on the services and supports that for early start that your child needs. Once that's been discussed and agreed to, there must also be written consent, something in writing from parents giving the go-ahead to implement those services. That being said, it's a process where where the regional center has an obligation to make sure everything is fully explained and clarified to the family. So the responsible agency, regional center, must fully explain the IFSP contents. So, what does it mean by these outcomes or objectives? What are these services? How often? Those clarification the regional center has to provide for the family. The services must be provided as soon as possible. This is a really important point. Like I said, these are the ages 0 to 3 are critical areas of development for your child. So this service, if there's any issues or problems, that has to be dealt with ASAP. And if services are to start, they should start as soon as possible. But that being said, you, the family, if there's a problem or an issue, you feel like and you want to go back and review that plan, keep in mind, you can actually revoke your consent. You, the parents, can do that. So just keep in mind that you do have that right to go back to the plan, to review the plan, even to revoke consent to services in the IFSP if there's an issue of concern about those services and how it's affecting your child. Actually, before I get into native language rights, I want to bring up one thing. So there have been some circumstances where families have are in a situation where they have a child who is in great need of early start services, but at the same and there's that great need, but at the same time they haven't really finished the whole application IFSP process. So there actually is something called an interim IFSP. So that's in a situation where early start services can actually start before the assessment is complete. And that's usually if there's an exceptional circumstance that prevents assessment from being done within 45 days. A good example, it would be like the pandemic at the start, where people were there was difficulty getting in-person assessments and evaluations. So that would be those are like a type of exceptional circumstance where it's like, okay, we understand there's a 45-day application process, but for whatever reason, that's getting delayed and our child needs these services. Can we have an interim IFSP? Yes, you can. Also, if parents consent to that, and then that plan can be developed in those exceptional circumstances. That being said, even if there is an interim IFSP, eventually it does have to be followed by the official IFSP. So that's like, okay, we finally finished those 45 days of the initial assessment for early start. So okay, we had an interim, but now we're going to have the follow-up with the official IFS Team meeting. Again, I just want to bring that up in case that is a situation that you, the family, might be in where you need early start services, but for whatever reason, the application process is being delayed or taking too long. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, now to native language rights. So native language rights, what do I mean by that? So the native language, your native language is the language that you, the parents, the family of the child, normally uses or prefers. And the regional center, they must provide information in a manner that is culturally and linguistically appropriate. What does that mean? It means giving the language providing information in your preferred native language. So what needs to be in the native language? The initial intake meetings, assessments. So that means documents that describe the evaluation of your child for early start. They should provide a Spanish version. The IFSP meeting, that should be in Spanish, or they should provide an interpreter who can translate for you at the meeting. The IFSP document itself. So you have a right to get that document also translated to your native language, and also the descriptions of the supports and services. So just want to keep in mind that this is a right that you have to get this information in a language that you understand, which is crucial for a family who has a child in need of early start services. Continuing on native language rights. Well, I just mentioned it in the last one. Regional Center must provide you a copy of the IFSP in your native language. But there might be an exception. That is, if DDS determines that it would be an undue hardship for the regional center to do so. Now, that being said, I believe that it would be very rare that DDS would make that determination, especially if the language you're requesting is one that is a threshold language, a language that is largely spoken in that local area. So Spanish definitely is not definitely not a language that would create an undue hardship for the regional center to provide. I just want to bring that up, though, that there might possibly be a circumstance where that could be a barrier to getting information in your native language. That being said, and again, even if it's not like a common language like English, Spanish, you could still make that request to get your information in your native language within a reasonable amount of time. It would be on the regional center and DDS to make the case that it's an undue burden, which again, I think would be a losing argument for them to make. So accessing, utilizing your rights to information in your native language. The regional center, they have to state the native language in your IFSP. Seems pretty basic, but I've actually seen regional centers actually not put the native language in like important documents. So they should make sure that they in fact do that. If the regional center does not document the native language, or they don't do these important processes in your native language, and this, I put IPP, but IFSP counts as well. You can actually file a complaint. So just keep in mind that this is a right that you have to get information in your native language. And there is a process for raising your concerns. Because again, these early start services, timeliness is crucial. So the quicker that they can address any issues, any confusion, any miscommunication, the faster your child can get the services that they need. Okay, and I just want to add some information about the role of the service coordinator. So the service coordinator, this is going to be the staff person from the regional center. They're going to assign someone to you, your child, as well as the provision of these early start services. They coordinate all services across agency lines. So if necessary, they should be connecting with the school district if their role is required. The regional center service coordinator may serve as the single point of contact in helping parents obtain the services and assistance they need. I'm assuming that a lot of families here are their local regional center is Golden Gate Regional Center. Golden Gate actually should have, they should have information specifically about how to contact them with questions about early start and who to connect to about starting the application for early start. So that is something that DGRC should have in place. But if there is that problem, always feel free. You're always feel free to reach out to DRC in our intake line. That service coordinator, they have to develop and review that IFSP. So just recall those timelines I provided in the previous slides, the whole having to review it every year, but then also having to evaluate it every year, but also review it every 6 months, or review it at any time. The family requests it, that the service coordinator has to follow up on that. They also coordinate evaluations and the facilitation, delivery of available services. So it's going to be that service coordinator who's reaching out, checking what service providers they're contracted with who can provide that needed service written in the IFSP. The service coordinator seeks appropriate services necessary to benefit the development of each child. So not just getting the services generally, but also, okay, is this service actually going to meet this child's needs? And they facilitate the development of the transition plan to preschool services. So that's going to be like, okay, what's the plan for right before your child turns 3 years old? What's the transition process going to be? How's it going to work where they're going to start getting these services they need from the school district and aging out of early start? So I've talked a lot about the whole early start process and what it is and how to apply, but what exactly are the services you can get? What kind of early intervention can my child receive, assuming it meets their needs, from the regional center? Well, I'll go into that in the next slide. So there's actually a broad range of services that the regional center can purchase, assuming it is identified in the IFSP. So that could be assistive technology. It could be, again, I put down a full list of the types of services. And I actually put down the law, Title 17, California Code Title 17. It actually has a list of these. But yeah, big range: assistive technology, physical therapy, occupational therapy, even sign language type support services. This has especially become a thing relevant with certain clients who in addition to having a developmental delay, have been deaf or have other impairments. So it's a wide range of services, and they have to focus on what is it specifically that would address the developmental delay that your child has. Now, that being said, I brought it up in a previous slide about the whole regional centers being payers of last resort. So that is something that could potentially be a barrier to regional centers getting services, early intervention services for your child. So what is a generic resource? What do they mean when a regional center says generic resource or generic agency? So a generic agency, it's any agency that receives public funds with legal responsibility to serve all members of the general public. Okay, what does that mean? So generic agency is pretty much any other agency that can provide the same or similar service instead of the regional center. And I put down a list of common examples. One big one is Medi-Cal. So if you could get a same or similar service through Medi-Cal, well, the regional center may require you to go through them first before they come to them. If you actually could get that service through Medi-Cal. Another one is IHSS, in-home supportive services from the county. This is not going to apply. These are for adults, but Department of Rehabilitation, and a big one, school district. Now, in general, the regional center, I would say, just to reassure everyone, it is the regional center that's going to be responsible pretty much for the provision of services under Early Start. And the school district takes more of that responsibility when your child ages out of Early Start, or age when they turn 3. That's where a school district should be taking on that role. But I do want to bring it up, the whole generic resource aspect, just at the possibility that regional center may require you to check to see if you can get that service for your child first from another agency before going to them. That being said, because Early Start is so important at these critical stages of development at such an early age, I would say that alone is enough to be like, okay, even if there is a generic resource aspect, my child needs these services ASAP. And you, the regional center, you have to provide it, at least for the time being, while I check with this generic resource you claim that I should exhaust first. So just want to give you that heads up. Just want to touch on Early Start rules as it applies to private insurance. So regional centers, and again, that's why I talked about generic resources, because private insurance is also a generic resource. But regional centers, they may require parents to use private insurance to pay for medical services in the IFSP. So these are more like services not specifically for addressing developmental delay, but like other areas of need that is separate, like medical, like medical need. So this may include paying deductibles and co-payments. That does not, however, the regional center cannot make you go through your private insurance just to do the basic evaluation and assessment for Early Start. So just want to provide that reassurance. Now that being said, let's say the regional center is like, okay, look, your child, let's say there's a situation where, okay, my child needs these early intervention services, but they also have these medical needs, and that is a huge issue that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for him to get any service without the medical need being met. And let's say this process is delaying this whole, is delaying everything. So like, because of the whole medical need issue that I have to resolve first, it's going to be making it longer for me to figure out when my child can get early intervention services. So that's why I pose that question. What if this process delays my child from getting Early Start services that they need? Well, if it's like I said, because it's absolutely crucial that your child get those services ASAP, then you can the regional centers can actually requires that regional centers allow for immediate funding of those necessary services. Now, the regional centers can still require you to, go through your private insurance to figure out funding of the medical need. But if that's a process, it's going to take time, and your child needs the Early Start services ASAP, and they will, then you can then that's something the regional center has to that has to abide by. Okay, we'll figure out the medical need, but since your child needs this right now, we'll fund that medical service right away. And then we'll resolve it. But right now, this is something that your child needs just to get those early intervention services. So I just want to bring up that point, the whole getting the regional center to act so that your child gets the early intervention services they need to address those developmental delays. Again, just continuing on the whole private insurance, the inability, if you are unable to get a decision from your private insurer about approval, whether your insurer is going to approve or deny a claim, that must not result in any delay of services, of Early Start services for your child. That being said, you have to still provide health benefit cards, whether it's private insurance, Medi-Cal, Medicare, to the regional center. So just make sure that the information is still being exchanged. But the lack of private, and if you don't have any private insurance or other benefits, that can't be, then fortunately, that cannot be used as a reason to deny services that your child, Early Start services that your child needs. And I put down the relevant codes that outlines this. And I guess just to sum it all up, early intervention services must not be denied or delayed for children of parents who are unable to pay insurance co-payments or deductibles. So if there is, if there's, let's say, a service that could be provided through your insurance or other generic resource, but you're unable to pay it, or there's a delay, well then the regional center has to help fund that to address that immediate need. So I just really want to emphasize that, the importance of minimizing delays and getting the service and making sure your child gets the services they need as soon as possible. Okay, so I talked all about this early start, the services and such. I also briefly mentioned about the whole, if there's an issue of concern, that you can actually bring these complaints to the attention of the regional center. So I'm going to touch on that as well, just like what your options are if problems arise. So there's actually a specific complaint process for early start service issues. So you can, and actually I can send the link to the actual DDS webpage that includes the address to where you can send complaints. But generally, you can file a complaint with DDS. Remember what I said, that DDS, they're the agency, that's the agency that sends the money to the regional centers. So DDS is going to be, so you can file a complaint to DDS raising this issue of the services that your child is or is not getting from the regional center. The complaint must include a description of the violation by the regional center relating to the provision of early intervention. So an example, just off the top of my head, I've had a client file we've had a parent file a complaint because their IFSP said my child needs speech therapy or something, or a type of services. But for whatever reason, regional center was really dragging its feet, being able to get a speech service, a speech therapy service provider. And again, like I said, timeliness is crucial. So the family was like, look, these are precious months that we're losing here. So I'm going to file a complaint to DDS. And that was something that DDS had to